not, yes. This is the last webinar from our season of 2017. And we are very glad that we are going to finalize with a wonderful speaker. And we have it here with us, Tim Pick, and he is an Emmy Award journalist. He has worked several years as a NBC former executive. And today he works as leadership consultant and coach. And as you know, with all this experience, he knows how to tell a story. And today he will tell us a story that can have the potential to change our actions. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to create leaders that are more conscious of their actions and their impact. And we are very happy to have him with us. But I'll let him speak and introduce also a little bit about himself. And he's in US, in California, is it right? Now, and I'm very glad and happy that you are with us. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you from so many different parts of the world. It's so exciting to see people from all across the world. I'm just so grateful for the technology that allowed us to do this. It's fantastic. And it's great to feel like I'm a part of something bigger, right? Something that's truly global. So thank you for the opportunity. One thing I want to say at the outset is I really hope this is a discussion. So I really encourage your questions and your comments and your observations. It may be a little bit difficult for me to see you doing that. I've got it in gallery view. So you can raise your hand or something if you've got something to say, but if I don't see you, just feel free to break in at an appropriate time. This is pretty informal. And I really think that you all have a lot to add to this because of your diverse perspectives. So please jump right in. And I'll pause also and ask for questions and all that. If I'm going too quickly or not speaking clearly, tell me that also, and I can change that because I do want you to get the most out of this that you possibly can. So as Adriana said, I currently am an executive coach and consultant, and I work with an organization called the Conscious Leadership Group. And we're dedicated to bringing conscious leadership to organizations, business and nonprofit organizations around the world. We're based in the United States. And I wasn't always a coach or a consultant. I did work in private industry for many, many years. And so I had the opportunity to see how wonderful good leadership can be, that good leaders can create wonderful places to work where people feel fully engaged and they're giving their best gifts and they feel fulfilled at the end of the day. They don't go home depleted and dragging themselves back to work the next day. And I've also had the opportunity to work in organizations that were the exact opposite. They were horrible places to work. And we really didn't get the best out of people and nobody enjoyed what they were doing, right? And so I'm really devoted to creating more organizations where people can give their greatest gifts. And I really believe that people only give their greatest gifts because they want to. They only give them because they love what they're doing. They only give them out of love. And yet many of our organizational paradigms, the way that we organize business and nonprofits, really are 200 or 300 years old. They come from the earliest days of the Industrial Revolution, and they're based on coercion and manipulation. And now it's the 21st century. So we need to update things. And my experience is that conscious leadership is the best way to do that. I used it for many years when I was a leader at NBC News and saw the positive results. So I both have firsthand experience of doing it, and now I have experience teaching other people and other organizations to do this too. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'm up to these days. So first I want to define conscious leadership, what conscious leadership is, because it's kind of an unusual term. And first, leadership, like who is a leader? And I like to define a leader as someone who is taking responsibility for their impact on the world, taking responsibility for their impact on the people around them. And that's a very broad definition of leadership. It's not just the people who are at the top of the organizational chart. It's not just the CEO and all that. We all affect the people around us. Now, some of us don't know that, or we don't take responsibility for that, so we're not acting as leaders. But someone who's willing to take responsibility for that, even if you're, in the mailroom or a barista or the lowest person in the organization, you can exercise leadership of yourself and the people that you come into contact with, your colleagues, your customers. So it's a very broad definition of leadership, which is good, because I think we can't depend on just the people at the very top of the organization to guide the organization effectively. Those days are over. And then what is consciousness? Consciousness is being aware of what's going on inside ourselves. It seems pretty simple, and yet my experience is most of us, including me, are not aware of what's going on inside ourselves. Instead, we're reacting, right? So we get an email about a deadline that's coming up, and we suddenly spring into action because we're afraid of not having enough time or something. So we're reacting unconsciously, versus consciously, we would say, oh, there's a deadline coming up. I notice I'm feeling some time pressure and some worry around that. What's the best way for me to respond to it? So conscious leaders respond to events rather than blindly react to events. They're not triggered. They're aware of what's going on. So is that definition clear to folks, what it is that conscious leadership is in this context? Great. Yeah, and so what we're devoted to at the Conscious Leadership Group is waking leaders up, waking everyone in an organization up to what's going on inside themselves so that they can know moment to moment what's going on. And it's important because the way that we approach our business, the way that we approach problems, questions, challenges, the way that we approach it, we believe is more important than what we know about approaching it. And a lot of our life in an organization is spent around acquiring knowledge, acquiring skills, knowing things, solving problems. It's around specific things that we know and how we apply them. And that's important. We need to know those things. But it's not nearly as important as how we use them, how we approach those problems. So one example might be that, let's say you work in a manufacturing company and there's a problem with a process. A product is coming out flawed. And there's a meeting that's called. And the person who's leading the meeting says, we've got a problem here. This is serious. We've got to figure this out. Whose fault is this? I want it solved by the end of the day. That's one context. That's one way of being with the problem of defective products. Now, how likely is that to get the best solution, the best thinking out of the team? Because that context creates fear. People are afraid, well, somebody's going to get in trouble, right? And what happens when we're afraid? First off, we start blaming other people. Well, it wasn't me because I told him to fix it, right? And so we don't get the straight story. And secondly, if we're in fear, it's very hard to be creative. It's very hard to learn and think creatively because we're, even at a very subtle level, we're trying to protect ourselves. So all of the work that we do around conscious leadership is aimed at creating a context for approaching problems that's more effective. We're not nearly as concerned with the content. We're not nearly as concerned with, okay, well, what's going on with the machine? What's wrong? That we're not nearly as concerned with as how are we exploring the issue. So I want to show you a video that explores this issue of context versus content, since it is so central to what we're going to be talking about. It's about 3 minutes long, and I'm going to start it up now, okay? First off, any questions before I start the video? Okay, so I'll do the video and then we can have a little conversation after that. Okay.
Content versus context. Brought to you by the Conscious Leadership Group. Find them on the web at www.conscious.is. What are you paying attention to? What differentiates conscious leaders from unconscious leaders is that they pay as much attention to context as they do content. All leadership is a conversation. All conversation has content and context. Content is what we're talking about. Context is how we're talking about it. When you're reviewing next year's budget with your team, you're having a conversation. The content of the conversation is revenue and expenses. Good leaders pay attention to the content, and in many cases, they're content experts. Conscious leaders, however, pay attention to context. They're always noticing how they're having the conversation. Are they having the conversation from curiosity or defensiveness? Wanting to listen, learn and grow, or wanting to defend their egos and prove they're right? Claiming responsibility or placing blame? Openness and candor, or from withholding and manipulating? One shorthand for context is to me versus by me. To me leaders see themselves as at the effect of people, circumstances and conditions. Life is happening to them. They're victims of the world around them. By me leaders see themselves as creators of their experience. They take radical responsibility for whatever is occurring in their lives. They live from a great experience of empowerment. Conscious leaders pay as much attention to context because context in the long run determines how innovative, creative, effective and collaborative our teams and we can be. When you're in to me, we're having a conversation based in fear or threat. And when we're in by me, we're having a conversation based in trust. Threat and fear produce results that leaves a toxic residue in the end. What we have observed over and over again is that when leaders have a conversation from to me, issues don't ultimately get resolved. They recycle. This recycling of issues is a major loss of time, money and energy. Unconscious leaders try to address this recycling by doubling down on content. Conscious leaders address the context first before addressing the content. Conscious leaders identify when they and others are in to-me mindset. They understand that this reactivity is coming from insecurity and threat, and they invite themselves and others to shift. Often, they simply ask that people pause and take a breath, because whenever they're triggered and in to me, they're not breathing well, and they're amped up on adrenaline. Then they address context directly and invite people to value listening over speaking, learning over being right, revealing over concealing facts, feelings and personal agendas. They, of course, model the shift they're asking others to make. It's quite amazing to observe how much more easily content issues can be resolved once context issues are addressed. Einstein knew this when he said, "A problem cannot be resolved from the consciousness from which it was created." Bingo. Shift the consciousness and context, and the problem resolves. What are you paying attention to?
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. What do folks think about that? Does that make sense? Have any of you noticed that in your own work? How the context, the way you're being with a question has a bigger impact on your success solving it than what you know about the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been president of oikos Brussels for 2 years, and it really helped me to put the context in place because the member understood where they started from and where they are to aim to. So it was not just a task to do, but it was really a journey that we do all together, and it really helps to rally the persons involved for the task or for the event.
Yeah, that's great. So smart leaders do that, right? They pull the team together and they create the context where everyone wants to be involved and wants to solve the problem. That's what really smart leaders naturally do. Good point. Anybody else? Yes, Pauline.
One thing I would like to add is, of course, the main mental state or emotional state of the people around the leader. So to pay attention, what is the atmosphere? And we at Oikos Hamburg at the board meeting always did an introduction. So everybody's saying what's the state of the feeling? And so that everybody else knowing, okay, how do I have to handle this person? and maybe what's the background when he's a little rough today. And I think this is also really important.
Yeah, that's a great.
To the real topics and the solutions.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, a lot of times in the business world, we think it's governed by sheer rationality, that emotions have no place, and you know, effective organizations, there's no emotion there at all. And that's just foolish. It's denying that humans are humans, right? Humans are always feeling emotions. There's always an emotional element to something, especially an issue that is intractable, an issue that's difficult to solve. Most organizations are filled with really smart, dedicated people. And yet, if these issues keep recycling, that's probably an indication that there's an emotional context to it that's keeping it in place and it's not being dealt with. So it's really important to recognize that there's both an intellectual issue and an emotional issue going on here. So that's a really great practice. And then also, sharing emotions builds team trust and cohesion, right? And we know that teams that trust each other are more effective. They work through problems faster. They hang together in tough times. So it's a really great point you bring up. One more. Anybody else? Great. Okay. So now that we've talked about context versus content, one of the things that we've done at the Conscious Leadership Group is we've developed what we call 15 commitments. In fact, we have a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And these are 15 commitments that conscious leaders make that support this idea of creating a context that's more effective. And it's the first one is really the most important one. And this is the commitment of responsibility, that I take responsibility individually for what's going on, right? That everything that's going on in my world, I actually have some responsibility for. And it's a strange idea because I think most of us, most of the time, feel like we don't have responsibility for things. How could I have any responsibility for the fact that my customers are choosing not to buy my product? That's their decision, right? And instead, I'm going to blame my customers because they don't see the value of what I'm offering, right? Or, you know, they're just cheap and they want the price to be lower and I can't produce the product for a lower price. So most of the time, we're not looking at ourselves. We're not taking responsibility, but instead we're pointing outward and blaming other people for what's going on. So conscious leaders turn that on its head, and they're willing to take responsibility for whatever is going on. And it's a really radical idea, right? This idea that whatever is happening, I have something to do with. And the great thing about that concept is it moves us from blaming to claiming, right? From blaming other people for what's happening to claiming responsibility. And it moves us into action because I can't really do much about other people. I mean, I'm sure we've all tried, right? Like we want to change somebody either in our personal lives or in our business lives. And, you know, what we find is we can do it, but it takes a lot of energy to do that, right? But the one person that we have total control over is ourselves. So if I decide I want to change something that I'm doing, it's relatively easy for me to do that. Much easier for me to change myself than change somebody else. So responsibility it's the first commitment that conscious leaders make because it's the most powerful. It completely changes the dynamic and moves us into an action stance, which I find really enlivening, right? So rather than, oh my God, I'm surrounded by idiots, won't these people ever get it right? And feeling sort of hopeless. If I take responsibility and ask myself, why am I surrounded by idiots, right? And begin to list the reasons. Well, you know, I haven't vetted people well. I haven't hired the best people. Or, you know, actually, it may not even be true that they're idiots. I just think they're idiots. Maybe I could change my thinking, right? That actually I'm surrounded by a really smart group of people, but maybe they're misdirected, right? Maybe I haven't given them clear instruction. Maybe they don't have good tools. So now I can launch on this path of trying to figure out how to solve the problem myself. I think it's tremendously liberating to try that on. For any issue that you're concerned about, you have some responsibility for it, right? Even global warming, think about that, right? We can blame the Americans, we can blame the Chinese for pumping all this carbon into the atmosphere. There's not much we can do about that necessarily. Or we can look and say, well, how am I responsible for that? Now we can begin to change our own behavior, whether that's lowering our own carbon footprint or contacting elected representatives and working toward policy changes, right? It takes us out of hopelessness and into action. So I love that commitment. It's a really great one. And afterwards, what I can do is I will forward to Adriana, and she can forward to you the list of all 15 commitments that we have, because they're really powerful tools for organizing ourselves day to day in our lives, in our organizations. So I'll be glad to forward those on to you. So one thing that conscious leaders do is they ask themselves 4 really important questions. And I want to go through those 4 questions with you, because they're questions that you can ask yourself. And the first question they ask themselves is related to this idea of context versus context. They ask themselves, where am I? Where am I? And we use a model it's a really simple model. It's just a line. And at any time, we're either above this line or below this line. And above the line looks like this. It looks like curiosity. I'm interested in learning. I want to know what's going on. I want to know how I'm responsible. I trust that things are going to be okay, right? So I'm in a very open, curious learning stance. You guys probably know what that's like, right? Being in this course. And then below the line, I'm closed, right? Things are happening to me. I'm defensive, right? So maybe I've got someone who's angry with me and I'm doing my best to protect myself and defend myself, right? And I'm not open to learning. I'm much more interested in proving that I'm right? It wasn't my mistake, right? And that's the exact opposite of learning. And you've probably experienced that too, right? Where you've been in discussions and you're just trying to, prove, no, it really wasn't my fault, and prove how right you are. And the other person's doing the same thing, and very little gets accomplished. So the first question that conscious leaders ask themselves is, where am I? So right now, right in this moment, just check in with yourself and ask, okay, where am I? Am I open and curious, or am I more concerned about being right about something? You could be more concerned about being right about, wow, this is boring, or I'm tired, or, I really wish I were doing something else, right? There are all sorts of things that we can be right about. So just take a moment and check in, where am I? And once you've had a moment to do that, I'd love to hear where you think you are and how you know where you are. So when somebody's located themselves, just raise your hand and let us know how you know where you are. Yeah, Hannah.
Yeah, so I feel a little bit tired today, or at the moment also. Maybe also a little bit stressed. I wouldn't say really stressed, but when you mentioned before open and close, I think at the moment I'm a little bit more closed. Not totally closed, because I try to figure out, but I'm not so open as usually, or in my moments of real curiosity. And I know it from my body feeling and also from my state of mind, and just feeling into myself.
That's great. And I love that you're using your body feeling as a clue into where you are. That's a really reliable way to do that. A lot of times we can trick ourselves with our thoughts, but our body doesn't fool us as often. Who else?
Yeah, let me talk. Like for me, like it's the one of the most crucial question that where I am. Like every time I ask it for me, like I go to some events, like most of the time, I assess it and do I feel comfortable here? If not, like there is some doubt inside of me that makes me like not to go there or not to participate because I don't feel all right there. So like that's one of the crucial point for me that every time I try to assess that, like, do I really belong here or not?
Mm-hmm. Great. So you've got a practice of checking in, and you ask yourself those questions. Fantastic. Who else wants to tell us where they are right now and how they know that? Yeah, Taco.
Yeah, hello. Actually, I just understand that I have been in the period of shifts. Even yesterday, now I'm having the exam period, and I'm all the time, oh my God, how I will make it. I have this test, I have this credit, and I mean, it is so stressful, everything. It's really hard to maintain. And even yesterday, I was complaining, and I understand that just complaining, it makes you, to me, person, right? You are just, you are complaining about something as if you didn't choose it.
Yeah.
But it's my choice. And, but today it's better. Today, I mean, just, I probably understand that it's just my decisions that influence my life. And actually that I'm now here with you, it is actually showing that I'm a little bit above the line.
Great. Thank you. How about one more person? Who wants to share with us where they are? Yeah, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. So right now I feel a little bit above the line, just like Taco. But I can say, like, for the last month, I felt really closed because I was so stressed and I wasn't open for other people and other thoughts. So sometimes I try to be open, even though I'm not really. So I'm telling the people, yes, so what's your opinion? But I felt like I couldn't really consider their opinion. So now I feel more relaxed and not so tired, and I also feel it in my body. I feel stronger, more active, and so on.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a great practice. In fact, I have a timer on my phone called Mind Jogger, and throughout the day, it pings and asks me the question, where am I? Right? So I'm always trying to remember to check in and just ask myself, okay, where am I? Am I above the line or below the line? So it's a really great practice just to be constantly asking, okay, where am I? Because again, my belief is it's our context that's more important than our context. It's how we're thinking about things that's more important than what we're doing or what we're thinking. You're all smart people. You know a lot. You're very capable. The differentiator between you and your colleagues is going to be where you are, how you're coming toward the issues that are in front of you. It's not what you know. So I want to show you another video that digs into this, okay?
Location, location, location. Brought to you by the Conscious Leadership Group. Find them on the web at www.conscious.is. Animation by Graham Franks. www.grahamfranks.com. One question that conscious leaders ask themselves over and over is, where am I? To support leaders in locating themselves as they ask the question, where am I? We offer this tool, a line, a simple black line. At any moment, all leaders and all people are either above the line or below the line. Our location describes how we're being with what is occurring in our life right now. If we're above the line, we are open, curious, and committed to learning. If we are below the line, we are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. Stop right now and simply ask yourself, where am I? In this now moment, am I above the line or below the line? Typically, when people are below the line, they believe certain things about the world. For example, they believe there is not enough. It could be that there's not enough money, or time, or space, or energy, or love. People below the line also believe that their story about the situation is right. People below the line also believe that there is a threat out there. Something or someone is threatening their desire for approval, control, or security. And people below the line see the situation as serious. The deeper below the line they are, the more serious things look. People below the line tend to behave certain ways as well. They tend to cling to an opinion, find fault and blame, gossip, explain, rationalize and justify, get overwhelmed, and avoid conflict or pursue conflict for the sake of winning. When people are above the line, they believe that learning and growing are more important than being right. They believe that all people and circumstances are their allies, here for their growth. They believe that from a distance, almost everything is funny. People above the line live in curiosity, listen deeply, speak unarguably, question all their beliefs, and live a life of play. Now, knowing what you know about being above or below the line, where are you? One thing to know as you consider this question: we are hardwired to go below the line. Literally, our brain is programmed to perceive threat, and when it does, a chemical cocktail courses through our veins, and we go below the line. This reaction was designed to help us survive in the presence of a real threat to our physical survival. An issue for modern-day leaders is that often our brains can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our ego or identity. We react and get defensive when we experience a threat to our ego. So in many ways, being below the line is natural and normal. But when we are below the line, we're not in a state, literally brain state, of high creativity, collaboration, innovation, and relational connection. We're simply trying to survive. Leaders today can't thrive if they're in survival mode. So the first activity of conscious leadership is location, location, location. In this now moment, where am I? Telling ourselves and others the truth about our current location begins the great conversation.
Okay. What'd you guys think of that? Any comments, any questions about that video? Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Yeah, and you can see how going below the line, there's actually an evolutionary reason for it, right? This is what kept us alive. You know, humans have a negativity bias, right? We look for problems. We don't look for how things are going, how well things are going, because the people who only looked at how well things were going, those are the ones who starved to death, right? Right? So there's a built-in negativity bias. There's a built-in fear mechanism that we have that's kept us alive. And it was really, really useful 100,000 years ago. But today, not nearly as useful. So a lot of what we're doing is we're fighting evolution. We're trying to, use our higher selves to override that little teeny part of our brain, the amygdala, that controls our fear response. The average person spends about 4 seconds above the line before something happens and they go below the line. 4 seconds. And then they start thinking about, do I have enough cat food, right? Or, wow, I've got that paper to do, right? There's something that comes in. It might not be a big thing, but they just dip down below the line and then, they resolve it or whatever, then get back above the line, right? So 4 seconds is what the average person does before something comes along. So what we try to do is just give people tools to notice when they're going below the line and then get themselves back up above the line. And the first thing is noticing, right? That's why consciousness is so important, because if we don't notice, if we're not conscious of where we are, we have no choice. right? We're just in it. But as soon as we notice, then we have freedom. Then we have a choice. And we can decide, like several of you mentioned, oh, I'm going to do some things to bring myself back up above the line, to increase my learning power, to get curious again, to get out of drama, right? But until we notice, we don't have any choice at all. So really, this is about freedom of choice. Noticing is the first thing. So what I tell my clients is, if all you do is notice where you are, that is a huge step, because now you actually have a choice for the first time. You have a choice to make a change. So noticing is really, really important. Any questions or comments about anything of that, like that I've talked about?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hannah.
Maybe what do you have? Maybe some suggestions to, because for example, one example would be, where am I now? To set a handy reminder, a smartphone reminder to think about it. Are there also actually other bless you tools which can help me to recognize it more often?
Yeah, well, one of them that you mentioned early on was, your physical feeling, your sensations, your physical sensations, and just tuning into that, right? Like, okay, how does my physical body feel? Do I feel tight? Do I feel open? Right? Do I feel tired? Do I feel energized? So I really like focusing on my physical sensations, and then also on feedback, right? We're always getting feedback from people all the time, right? And so to pay attention to that, because a lot of times we'll get feedback from someone and we'll either ignore it because it doesn't comport with our story about what's going on, or we'll get defensive and deny it. So paying attention to feedback that we're getting, whether it's direct feedback from other humans, them saying something to us, or looking at our results, like, wow, I noticed that this work seems really tough and it's going really slowly. That's some feedback, like, oh, I wonder why that is, right? Maybe it's not the job, maybe it's not the work that's in front of me, maybe it's me. So we're always looking at feedback, whether that's physical feedback from our own bodies, verbal feedback from other humans, or feedback from the machines and processes that we're working in, right? Those are all clues. And again, that first commitment of responsibility. If something's not working, rather than look outward for the cause, the first thing that a conscious leader does is ask themselves, how am I creating this? How am I creating this problem? Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah. So the second question the conscious leaders ask themselves, so the first question is, where am I? The second question they ask themselves is, can I accept myself for being exactly where I am? That sounds like kind of a funny question. But my experience is we can't change what we can't accept. So if I'm below the line and I say, I don't want to be below the line, I am having a terrible situation, this is not where I want to be, this is not good, this is not right. How many people have that experience, right? Yeah, right? We don't like where we are, it's the wrong situation, we want to change. So what do? We start beating ourselves up, or we start lashing out at other people, right? And what that does is it hardens the ego. It sets up a fight within ourselves with our ego, where we're telling ourselves, you are wrong. You should not be doing this. Now, the ego is just trying to defend itself, right? The ego is our tiny little, like, 4-year-old self, right? Doesn't like it when it's being blamed for something. And it's just trying to defend itself. So if we come at ourselves and say, no, Tim, you're having the wrong experience. You need to change. The ego is saying, I'm not changing. Screw you, right? And it sets up this conflict and actually makes it harder for us to shift, for us to change. So, same as with dealing with any 4-year-old, the best course is loving acceptance, right? So, yes, I accept the fact that I'm having a bad experience. I do not like this. This is terrible. I'm just accepting that. And that can be very difficult to do because we want to change the experience. Now, that's different than accepting the experience, right? That doesn't mean that I'm just going to give up and say, well, it's God's will. And this is what it is. And it's not that at all. Rather, we're accepting that we're having the experience. It's a subtle difference, but it's, I can accept that I am not happy now, that I am below the line, that I'm fighting with my colleagues. That's what's happening. That's reality. In a lot of ways, it's like what Jack Welch, the head of GE and legendary manager, used to say. He said that the team that sees reality first wins. So it's really just recognizing reality. Got it. I'm having a really terrible time. This is not the experience I want. I accept that that's what's going on. So that does two things. Number one, we get to see reality. And number two, it allows our defenses and our ego to relax. It puts us in a state where we're a little more open to change. So the second question that conscious leaders ask themselves is, can I accept myself? Now, sometimes the answer is going to be no, I can't accept it. And that's fine too. So can you just accept that you're unwilling to accept where you are? So that's a really big move. Before we can actually change, we need to ask, can I accept what's going on? Any comments or questions about that idea? Yeah, Tiffany.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, my question would be, if you say you can't accept yourself for being, I don't know, for fighting with your colleagues, for example, what could be a step to accept yourself? Or what could you do to feel better and to be more conscious?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you can't accept that, if you're saying to yourself, I should not be fighting with my colleagues, this is, I hate myself for this, I feel terrible about myself, and you can't accept that, then try taking a step back. Can I accept that I can't accept that? Right? And there's some shift moves that we're going to talk about. That's one of the other questions that conscious leaders ask themselves, that we'll get to that. But the first thing is, if you can't accept yourself, can you just accept yourself for being unwilling to accept yourself? Right? Okay. Other questions or comments?
And may I ask a question?
Yes.
Well, what's my question? Well, nowadays we have a very hectic life, all this traffic jams, etc. And it's very hard to eliminate this ego, as you say, to eliminate this selfishness or something, And when you are interacting with people and you feel like, oh my God, I'm right. In fact, I'm right in this maybe doubt or no conversation, for instance. I'm right in that and accept his arguments or something else. So what to do in this various situation when you're certain that you're, but then it comes out that, oh my God, I'm wrong. I was wrong. I was so wrong. But it's already late for that. I hope you understand me.
Yes. Yeah. And again, my view of it doesn't even matter whether you were right or wrong. The facts don't really matter. Right? It's not the facts as much as, are you willing to learn? So you could be right about something and the facts would support you. 2 + 2 is 4, right? And you're arguing with your colleague. The question is not, am I right? But rather, am I willing to learn? So then the question is, okay, I know I'm right about this. This person disagrees with me. Maybe they're seeing something that I'm not seeing. Like, how is it that we're seeing the world so completely differently? I'm really curious about what's going on over there, because in my world, 2 + 2 does equal 4. I'm certain of that. In their world, it's something else. So now I'm just really curious. I want to understand what's going on over there, because we could keep arguing back and forth and do this forever, right? And it's not really going to get us anywhere. But if I'm willing to say, okay, now I just want to, I'm curious. This is totally different. I really want to know what's going on. Now, not only can I expand my learning around different ways that people perceive mathematics, but I can create connection with that person and we can actually get back on the same team. To me, that's much more powerful than agreeing to disagree or apologizing or something like that. For me, it really comes back to this question of, am I willing to drop being right and instead get curious so that I can learn? Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. So the third question that conscious leaders ask themselves after where am I and can I accept myself for being wherever I am? The third question they ask is, am I willing to shift? Okay. So if I'm below the line, am I willing to shift above the line? And it's a really great question because most of the people that I talk to, most of the leaders I coach and teams that I consult with, if they're having a problem and you ask them, hey, do you want to solve the problem? Do you want to stop fighting with your colleagues? They'll all say, yes, I really want to. I really, really want to. Right? And I believe that. I really believe them. And yet the results are that nothing's changing. Right? And so we really like to look at, rather than what do you want, what's your intention, what's your noble goal, let's look at the reality. And the reality is you're saying that you want to stop fighting with your colleagues, and yet you keep fighting with your colleagues. Right? So the reality is you're actually committed to fighting with your colleagues. Let's not believe what you're saying, but instead let's believe what you're doing. So a lot of people will say, yes, I want to shift. I want to move above the line. I want to get curious. I want to resolve this issue. I want to be in connection. And I really believe them that they do want that. But very few people are actually willing to do that. So there's a difference between wanting something and being willing to do something. And you all probably have examples of that in your life, right? Like, wow, I want to spend a lot of time studying, and yet I go out with my friends and I'm out at the bar until 2 a.m., right? So you're unwilling to spend the time studying. You know, the fact is, you were willing to go out with your friends, you weren't willing to stay in and study. So we ask this question, am I willing to shift? Which is very, very different from, do I want to shift? And the way that we probe for that is we use these 15 commitments and we turn them into questions. So for instance, am I willing to take responsibility for what's happening? Right? If a colleague is disagreeing with me, am I willing to take responsibility for their disagreement? Right? Or we would ask, am I willing to be curious and value learning above being right? Or am I willing to be candid and reveal any thoughts that I've been withholding from the other people involved in this issue? So these are specific actions, things that we can do, that we ask ourselves to just probe and understand, am I willing to shift? And so again, where am I? Can I accept where I am? And then, am I willing to shift? And it takes a little bit of work to understand, am I truly willing? Because I probably want to shift, but if I'm still getting these same results, the fact is I'm not willing to. Any comments or questions about that idea? Am I willing to shift, and what willingness means versus wanting?
Well, I don't clear out. I understand the concept of willing to shift. I mean, how I will that and how I will moderate that in my brain and how I will feel that I really want to shift. How I will even imagine that. I don't understand this concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it is kind of a fuzzy concept. And the question really gets down to practicality. So am I willing to do some things that would spark a shift? And it's a great question because that takes us to the fourth question that conscious leaders ask themselves. And that fourth question is, if I am willing to shift, how will I shift? What will I do specifically to shift from a defensive state of wanting to prove I'm right and not being open to learning to trusting, being curious, being open to learning? How will I do that? And there are a lot of shift moves, a lot of things that we can do to shift ourselves. And I'll teach you a couple of them right now. So the first move, and I love this move, it's really great. You can do it anywhere. It's focused on breathing, right? So we're always breathing all the time, but we're not necessarily breathing really effectively. And one of the things that happens when we are below the line and in this mild state of threat and fear is our breathing changes. It's actually shallower, right? It's not as efficient, it's not as effective as it normally is. And so by breathing deeply and consciously, we can actually change our brain chemistry and move ourselves above the line. So let's just try this. What I want to do is do 4 breaths of about 4 seconds in and 4 seconds out, really smoothly, not holding our breath at the top of our inhale or the bottom of our exhale. And so I'm going to count, and let's just all do 4 breaths of about 4 seconds each. So in, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. So just notice, check in with yourself. Do you feel any different now, having taken those nice 4 deep breaths? You want to talk about if they're feeling anything any different, what it was like doing that?
It might be some kind of yoga, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yoga is, it's a really time-honored way of shifting our consciousness. None of this stuff is new. People have been studying this and looking at this for thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, yoga is definitely related to yoga.
It's nice.
Yeah. And you can do this anytime, right? So you're in a meeting, you're feeling kind of triggered, you're noticing that you're below the line. So you can just quietly to yourself take 4 slow, deep, conscious breaths. And then odds are you're going to feel a lot more positively engaged and more open to learning than you were before. It's a great move. It's always available to us. So the other thing that we can do is movement. And Hannah, you mentioned this, like noticing your body and using your body as a clue to whether you're above or below the line. Physical movement is another way that we can move ourselves above the line. One of the worst things we do for ourselves is sit, right? Sitting is the new smoking in terms of its health effects and all that. And in business, we do that a lot, right? Especially if there's something difficult that we need to deal with. We'll get together in a room, we'll sit around a table, and we'll just sit there and hash it out, right? And it really is the worst way that we can do this. Far better to move. Steve Jobs knew this, right? When he had a difficult conversation that he was going to have with somebody, he would have a walking conversation with them. He was famous for taking long walks by himself if he was working something out, or with someone else if he had a really difficult conversation to have with them. So walking, moving, it's a really great way to loosen up our thinking, loosen up our minds. And again, all we're trying to do is get out of this mode of thinking where we're locked in struggle around this issue or with this other person. So a lot of times in meetings, what I'll do is I'll invite people to get up. It's like, okay, let's just get out of our chairs and we can continue talking, but let's just spend 30 seconds moving around or even in our chairs. And again, you can do this anywhere, right? So I see Adriana doing it now, right? She's sort of moving her shoulders, her neck, and it loosening up our body loosens up our minds, right? It gives our mind the clue that, okay, I can loosen up now. Versus when we're in fear, when we're in conflict, what do? We get rigid, right? So you can, even wiggle your toes under the table. No one needs to know that. Wiggle your fingers and just, sort of move a little bit. And notice what effect that has. Yeah. dancing is a great example of this, right? Who feels bad after they've been dancing? It's almost impossible. Yeah. What do you guys notice about movement?
Yeah, I also recognize that going out and walking or jogging or biking or swimming, all this also helps me to calm down. And for example, I remember when I was writing my thesis, I was also sitting the whole day, and so I went out to the forest and just swim, and so this really helped me to stay kind of relaxed, although I was mentally sometimes not distressed, but kind of.
Yeah. So a lot of you've probably all got ways that you do this in your own life naturally, right? So from going out for a run or exercising to I'm just going to get up and go out and smoke a cigarette or something like that, right? I mean, even though the smoking isn't good, like that getting up, changing, moving, changing location, right? And then suddenly you might even have the solution to the idea while you're outside, just standing outside. So it loosens things up. So movement is a really great way to do this. So breathing, movement, two things always available to you. And yet most of the time we don't take advantage of them. The third thing is more of an internal move. So I think appreciation is a really great way to shift. So appreciating. And that can be appreciating the problem, right? Like just appreciating, wow, this is really great that we're faced with this problem because it's forcing us to be more creative. And I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's difficult right now, but I'm really appreciating this opportunity to get outside our usual box and be forced to come up with a new way to do things. Or appreciating the other person. It can be, and you don't have to say it, although if you do say it, it can be really powerful, but just saying to yourself, wow, I really appreciate how passionate they are about their position, right? They really are arguing for it, and I really admire and appreciate them for that. Or appreciating yourself. I really appreciate how devoted I am to finding the solution here, right? How much I want to solve the problem, how hard I've been working. So just taking a moment to appreciate ourselves or other people or the situation, again, that shifts our mindset. It's very hard to be in a state of fear and genuinely appreciate something. Have any of you ever noticed that? How when you can appreciate somebody else or something else, that it changes things entirely? Yeah. In a lot of organizational cultures, there's very little appreciation that goes on. A lot of leaders have the story of, well, if I appreciate my people, they'll get lazy, right? Or they won't keep working hard or something like that, right? And so people can be very stingy with appreciation within organizations. One of the things that I do with teams all the time is I'll put them on an appreciation diet where every day they've got to appreciate other people on the team. And not only does it help build connection between the team, but it also gets them into a more creative and connected and learning state. It tends to take them above the line. One thing you can do that's a really great practice is just keep track of how often do I appreciate myself, others, food, beauty, like things around me. How often do I do that during the day? And you'll probably find it's a shockingly low number. And then you can play the game of, okay, so I'm going to up that number and I'm going to appreciate things, at least 5 times a day or something like that. Be a really fun game to play with yourself. And then this is the last shift move. Again, it's kind of an internal move, but it's super powerful. Is this idea of questioning my story, right? So questioning how right I am about something is the opposite of my story, at least is true, if not truer than my story. So if my story, for instance, is it's bad that people smoke, right? Would I be willing, and I know I'm right about that, right? Because there's all this research, right? And I've seen people die of cancer and all that. I know I'm right, that it's bad that people smoke, right? So right there, I'm below the line. And if I'm trying to get people to stop smoking, being righteous about that is probably going to limit my effectiveness. First off, people aren't going to like it. Like, nobody likes to be told they're wrong. Nobody likes to deal with someone who is an evangelist and, really like crazy about something, right? So it's going to limit my effectiveness. So would I be willing, just for the sake of learning, to ask, well, how is it actually good that people smoke? What are some things that are at least as true about smoking being bad? I mean, one thing that's true is it gets people up out of their desks, right? It can stimulate their thinking, right? Oh, it's also enjoyable. I mean, it really, like after a meal or something, it's really delicious to smoke. So it's really enjoyable. Oh, it brings people together, right? The smokers tend to hang out together and they talk and all that. It actually can aid friendship and team building. So those are 3 ways right there that are, I think, at least as true as my beliefs about smoking being bad. Those are 3 reasons that it's good. Now, what that says is, it doesn't say, oh, everyone should go out and smoke, but rather, I know that what I'm saying is not absolutely true, right? It's one possibility. I have a preference that people not smoke, but it's not a law of nature, right? And so now I hold my belief a little more lightly, right? And I'm willing to entertain other possibilities. Now I'm above the line. I'm actually listening to other people when they tell me that, no, smoking is actually good for me. I can say, actually, you're right. I can think of at least 3 ways that it actually is very good for you. And my preference is that you not smoke, because I do believe that there's research that shows that's going to shorten your life. It's going to raise healthcare costs. Our company will end up paying more out for you. You'll have more sick days. So my preference is that you not smoke. That sounds a lot better than, you shouldn't smoke. Smoking's going to kill you. It's bad for you. I demand that you stop smoking. So questioning our beliefs and just going through that exercise, trying to find at least 3 reasons that the opposite of our story is at least as true, prompts us to learn things and to hold our beliefs more lightly so that we can engage more effectively with people. Has anyone ever done that? Has anyone ever tried that? How does that sound? Would you guys be willing to try that the next time that there's something that you know is right, something that you really believe? Would you be willing to explore how the opposite is true?
I will try it.
Yeah. Yeah, Tiffany, you were going to say something.
You can go on first. I will say it after.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I actually used to smoke. I smoked for a year. I was, when I was a young reporter, I was covering the steel industry in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, I was out of college. I knew nothing about steelwork. I was culturally very different than these steelworkers that I was supposed to be learning about and writing about. So I said, well, they all seem to smoke. I'll take up smoking. And that gave me the opportunity to ask them for a cigarette or ask them for a light and strike up a conversation with them. So for the year that I covered the steel industry in Pittsburgh, I smoked, and then I quit. I was fortunate I was able to quit afterward. But it was a great tool for me as a journalist.
I don't have any precise example now, but I try to open myself to questions that I really disagree with. At the end, other people also open themselves, and then sometimes just it finished like, okay, yes, you're right. And at the end, I didn't want to be right when I started to talk with them. I was just like, okay, try to understand how they think, and then because I wasn't judging them, they also open themselves and try to understand how I think. And sometimes after 3-4 months, we talked together about the same topic, and they were like, yes, I changed that because, and they didn't tell me, yes, you were right, but because they changed this thing, I was like, oh, okay, that's what I told, I think it's right. And it was a great feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, right? That we get to lead by example, first off, right? So when we're willing to be open and accepting of other people's viewpoints, they feel welcomed, they can relax, and they see that they can do the same thing. It's, as a leader, that's a powerful thing to do, right? To be willing to say, this is what I want. It's a preference that I have. I am completely open to hearing other points of view because I really want to understand other points of view. You know, maybe I'm missing something. There could be something here that I'm missing. Or you guys probably know things that are going to add to our understanding of this. So rather than coming in and saying, this is the way it's going to be, and forcing people to get in line, I'm inviting them to be a part of the conversation. So Tiffany, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really effective strategy for any type of leadership. And it's, yeah, and a lot of it, I think, comes back to humility, right? Having the belief that we don't know everything and that other people know things that they might not even know themselves. But if we can create a space for curiosity and learning, we're going to draw them out. You know, my experience of the best leaders is the best leaders are masters of context. It's back to this idea of content versus context. The best leaders are not necessarily the people who know the most about the business, but they are masters of creating a context where people feel like they can shine, that they have something to contribute, right? That they can take initiative. So they're masters of shaping the way we're going to be together as an organization. I like to think of CEO as, instead of being the chief executive officer, the CEO is the chief energy organizer. My job as the CEO is just to organize people, to create the context and show the direction for people to use their energy, right? And I make sure it's coordinated and all of that, but I don't have to know anything about what they're doing. I just have to make sure that we're creating a context so that they can be their best selves. And that becomes a lot more fun too, right? Suddenly, as a leader, I don't have to know everything. I just have to make sure that my people feel empowered to tell me what they know. And we can make decisions and learn together. What else? Any other questions or comments about any of this? Yeah, Emil.
We have also a skin that wanted to say something.
Oh, great. All right.
He put his hand up.
Okay, let's hear from him first.
Yeah.
I want to. Okay, Emil.
Yeah, no, you first, please.
Okay. So I want to add something about breathing. I have personally ruled 10-second rules because before they made any important decision, I'm taking 10 seconds breath before the decision, and I think it's decreased the possibility of make some wrong decision for myself.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, yeah. So at a minimum, by taking a moment to breathe, you're giving yourself a little more time to consider things. Super smart move. I love that practice. Yeah. Emil, how about you?
Yeah, I want to add something about the context and content leaders. For example, as you know, the teachers is the main, facilitators, and when you are going to school, the first man who teach you to be the leader is your teacher. So when I get education in my university, so I'm a teacher, and when my teachers show me that we are not right when we are telling some stories, so and forcing us to believe in one idea, and some guys are not aware value these ideas, and they just asking questions. Why should we believe in that? And I want to ask you something. For example, I'm working with other leaders. For example, we have two projects which are connected with each other, so we should work together. But I'm a leader who are working with people, understand each other, and help them to facilitate their possibilities. But another leader is just want to force the people around him to do something. How we can communicate and how we can gonna be work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it gets back to this idea of I could try to change them, but it's going to be super inefficient to try to change this other person's leadership style, right? Now I know that I have a preference to lead differently. Right? I believe that we should be more collaborative and give people more opportunity to do these things themselves. This other person is much more directive. And my belief is that he's wrong, I'm right. So the first thing is just notice, are you above or below the line? And one sign about being below the line is, I know I'm right, right? Another sign is, this is serious. This is a problem that he's leading one way and I'm leading another way, right? And another sign that you're below the line is there are only two alternatives here, right? Either he does it my way or I do it his way. Things are very black and white below the line. Right? So then you ask, okay, I might be below the line on this. And remember, we're not doing anything about solving the problem yet. We're still just looking at how are you, Emil, coming to the problem. And so you can say, well, maybe I am a little below the line. I feel pretty strongly about this, and it seems serious, and there are only really two alternatives that I can see. So can I accept myself for that? So can I accept, wow, there's some friction here, and I really don't want there to be friction, and yeah, this really is a problem. So just check in if you can accept yourself and give yourself a little bit of acceptance. Yeah. And then the next question is, okay, am I willing to shift? Am I willing to shift? Because I get that you want to. You check in, am I willing to? So a great question here would be this whole idea of, am I willing to use the shift move of questioning my story? So in what ways is it actually good that he leads the way he does? Can you come up with a few ways, like genuine ways, not BS reasons, genuine ways that his leadership style is perhaps even better than your leadership style? Do you have any, can you think of any ways that he's actually a better leader than you are in this regard?
Yeah, for example, maybe just think about it. Like, I believe that context leaders, so I'm a teacher, and when I should give education to some students, I should think about their ideas, and it take a lot of not money but time. Mm-hmm. But when you are forcing some people, some leaders in our country, so in outside, believe that if you are not facilitate people but forcing them to do something, you just keep your time.
So it takes less time. It's more efficient.
Yeah.
Great. That's a really good, right? And teachers never have enough time. So that's one way that his approach is better. How about another? Can you come up with another reason that he's actually a better teacher in this regard?
Maybe a little bit concerns about the experience of this leader. So if his, how I say, authority in this, I could say economy, history, or something like that, and his authority, and I cannot discuss with him because a lot of people around me are believed to him, not to me. So nice. He has the power and I'm not.
Great. So he has a lot of authority and experience in this area. So maybe he actually does know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Great. So now check in, and how are you holding your story about this is a problem, he should be doing it my way? Right? Does it seem a little bit lighter to you?
Well, in my opinion, there are two kinds of leadership. It's like a leader and a boss. So what's the main difference between a boss and a leader? So leader, in my opinion, is better. Leader always helps its co-workers or help someone and help other people maybe. Also, leader have all these steps that we have already mentioned, all these, as I can say, stages. When boss only controls his little companions and just rules and doesn't anything else. So I think it can be answered to the question.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Emil, now that you're holding this story about this teacher style being worse than mine and he should change for your joint project, now that you're holding it a little bit lighter, that you're not as forceful about it, you can start thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? What action steps do I want to take? So, for instance, you could have a conversation with him. Now that you're not convinced that you're as right as you are, the chances of that conversation going well are a lot better. And so you could have a conversation of, I notice that our teaching styles are very different. My teaching style is, I like to do this, this, and this. You like to do it this way. And I'm curious whether that's going to cause a problem, right? I don't know. I suspect that could be some conflict. And so I want to have a discussion with you so that we're not coming into conflict, so that we're not confusing the students in this project, so that we have a complementary approach at least. What are your thoughts on that? That's a much different conversation than, hey, I do it this way, you do it that way. We've got to figure out a better way. Like one of us has to change. Now, suddenly, there's the possibility for there could be all sorts of solutions, right? So one solution would be you could just tell all the students at the start, Emil likes to teach this way. This other person likes to teach that way. You're going to notice a big difference. We actually believe that it's an effective combination. And between the two, that you're going to learn in some very different ways. So we're going to give you some different approaches to round out the way you're learning, right? That would be one way to deal with it. Another way would be you could each try taking the other's role. So I can imagine, Emil, that you actually could learn a lot from this person. Not that you want to teach that way all the time, but there may be times where you say, there's not a lot of time here. The class is getting a little fractured. I need to step in and just tell people, these are the 6 things you need to know. Boom, boom, boom. So it's an opportunity for you could actually expand your teaching repertoire, your teaching abilities. Not that you want to do that all the time, but it's a tool that you might want to use sometimes. So there are a lot more possibilities that you can explore now rather than just, I'm right, he's wrong. Any other questions or comments? We've just got about 5 minutes left. I'd love to hear more from you all. Yeah, Tiffany.
I had a question about what you said before, and how do you deal? You said you have to take responsibility to think that you're responsible for the things you do. Then I thought, how do you deal with responsibility and failures? Because I thought about some friends, and they are not thinking it's because of the others. They are thinking it's only I failed and it's my fault, and it's not really positive.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we like to talk about taking 100% responsibility. So that's not 120%. That's not 200%. So generally speaking, let's say that there are 4 people involved in an issue and it fails, right? Like, so we're involved in a project, there are 4 of us doing it and it fails. What happens below the line is we start apportioning blame. Whose fault is it that we failed? And so maybe we'll say, well, this person was the leader. It's mostly their fault. It's like 70% their fault. And this person didn't work very hard. It's like 20% their fault. This person went on vacation in the middle of the project, so they've got a little bit of blame also, right? And so we start dividing up the pie of responsibility, whose fault it is. That would be a below-the-line way to do it. I prefer to think of it as there are 4 people involved. Each person has 100% responsibility. They each have different roles, right? The leader had a different role than the software designer, right? But they were each 100% responsible for their role and not responsible for the other person's role, right? So if I'm the leader and let's say it was a software project and we didn't get the software done in time, I could ask, well, one of my responsibilities in my role was setting out the timeline. Maybe I didn't tell people enough exactly what the timeline was and what the toll booths that we had to hit along the way were. Maybe that's how I'm responsible. But people, I did tell them what the deadline was, and this person did take off time in the middle. That's not my responsibility. They're responsible for that part, right? Or the software was poorly designed. I'm not a software expert. The person who wrote the code, they're responsible for that. So we're only taking 100% responsibility, not 150 or not less, not 80% responsibility. And for leaders, that can be very difficult because this whole idea of the buck stops here. I'm the leader, so if it fails, I'm fully responsible. I don't think that. I think, like, as a moral issue, that's a good one, but practically speaking, that doesn't really leave any room for improvement because the things that I don't have control over, I'm not responsible for. So your friend, a really great exercise for your friend would be just to look at, what is my 100% responsibility? What was I actually able to affect? And what were other people able to affect? And how can I encourage everyone to take their portion of responsibility? Because if I'm taking too much, then I'm encouraging them not to take enough. So I'm only going to take my responsibility, and I'm going to look to people to only take theirs. How about one more comment or question before we wrap up?
Well, may I say something? Actually, it was always my problem because I always said that, okay, I failed. Actually, it's not my fault. Someone did it instead of me, so it's not my failure. For instance, I got a bad mark, for instance. Actually, it's not my failure. I have studied all my work, etc. I did a good job, actually, but I failed because of someone. And when I always said that, I have always failed, in fact. So, well, for some times, for a couple of years, I changed my mind and I did different. I accepted my failure. So I think it's really a very good point. But what I'm going to ask, is it always good to accept your failure, even if you are not responsible for this? Sometimes, maybe in a teamwork or something.
Yeah, it's to accept only your part of the failure or only your part of the success, because that allows you to learn, right? If you're always saying, hey, it wasn't my fault, like it was the product development team, I'm in sales, right? They told me they would have this product and it wasn't ready when I went out to sell. It's all their fault. That doesn't move you forward. It's worth asking the question, okay, even though I was on the sales team, how am I responsible for the product team not getting it to me in time? For instance, did I make clear that I needed it by a certain date? Did I remind them of that? Was I clear about that? Are there other things I could have done to ensure the success of this project? And usually there's always something. If we're concerned about an issue, that's a sign that there's something that we were responsible for. And again, it just opens us up to learning. How can I learn so that we don't repeat this problem in the future? Because if I'm just blaming somebody else, that's very handy, but it doesn't really move us forward. Yeah. Okay. We're at 10:30 or 10:30 California time. I don't know what time it is where you are, but we're at our time. Thank you very much for listening. I'll send that sheet to Adriana, and if you have other questions, I'm glad to address them, and you can get in touch with me through Adriana.
Thank you so much, Tim, for this very inspiring webinar. I think all of us have learned something today. I did. I have learned a lot, and thank you for that. And today is, like I said before, is the last LEAP webinar of the semester, but the LEAP is going to start again next semester. If you haven't been to the track that is more advanced, that goes to the personal development, I truly recommend you to do it. We are going to open the registration soon, and I'm sure those that are they already have done it, this track can tell you a little bit more about it later on. And Tim, I really appreciate your time. It was amazing and extremely inspiring. If everyone could make unmute yourself and say thank you very much for Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your contributions. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Me
For
too.
those that would like to stay in the line to do a reflection of this webinar, please stay. And if you cannot stay, just leave. It's not a problem at all. Okay?
Bye-bye,
Thank
folks.
you. Thank you, Tim.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
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 I have to leave now. I'm sorry. I wish
No
you a
worries,
wonderful
Pauline.
reflection.
Bye.
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 I have to leave too. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I really enjoyed everything with you.
Yeah.
And see you soon, I hope so.
See you, Salma.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
Yeah.
Akko, would you like to? I will stop actually.